Welcome to our Rapid Fire Wednesday Q&A for corporate immigration professionals. I'm Kimberley Robidoux, a partner in San Diego, and I'm joined by Miki Matrician, co-managing partner of our Boston office. Good morning to you, Miki.
Hi, Kim.
Hey. So last week we discussed ICE enforcement actions, and for today's installment, we are discussing the H-1B cap. So just like this time of year is tax season for accountants, it is H-1B cap season for immigration attorneys and organizations that sponsor foreign nationals for professional positions under the H-1B category. So there are a limited number of H-1B visas that may be granted every fiscal year, which goes from October 1st through September 30th. And because an H-1B petition may be filed up to 6 months in advance, April 1st is the first day that an H-1B petition subject to the cap may be filed with USCIS. So it's really not April Fool's Day, but that's the day that everything can start being submitted. So we have not had sufficient H-1B visas for many years, and that has meant that organizations have had to file H-1B cap petitions and then hope and fingers crossed that their cases are selected in a lottery and that they win the coveted H-1B spot. So since 2020, USCIS has conducted an H-1B cap lottery by using an H-1B cap registration process with MyUSCIS. And prior to 2020, global mobility and immigration professionals had to prepare complete H-1B cap petitions to file with USCIS and then wait months to see if their cases have been selected in the lottery. Now the process is a simple registration online in March, and then the random computer-generated selection process is conducted towards the end of March. But there is so much more that global mobility and HR professionals have to do to prepare for this H-1B cap season. So, Miki, can you tell us about the H-1B classification and why this is an important time of year?
Yes, absolutely. So the H-1B classification is for professional workers that are sponsored by companies for a specialty occupation. What's a specialty occupation? It means that for positions that require at least a bachelor's degree or the equivalent in a specific field of study. So an example is a software engineer position that typically requires a bachelor's degree in software engineering or computer science. That's like the easiest example. And the H-1B is typically the stepping stone for employees that are working for companies via their optional practical training or STEM OPT extensions. And these employees need the H-1B in order to be able to continue to work in the US because their work authorization is limited. For many years, there haven't been enough H-1B visas to make it through the fiscal year end. In fact, those H-1B numbers have been used up within the first few days that companies can file the petitions, which resulted in the lottery. And so, in order to have any chance of being selected for a coveted H-1B number in the old system, companies had to file the H-1B petition as soon as possible, which was April 1st. And now, as you mentioned, the H-1B process has moved to an electronic registration system, which is great and alleviates the burden for employers. They don't have to file the petitions, that we go through the registration process and then proceed once selected.
Yeah, right. So this H-1B cap registration process, as you mentioned, was first introduced in March 2020, and now it's the process that we utilize for the cap season. And like you said, it's been a little bit easier instead of putting together all those petitions, the checks, and filing them off, in the mail or FedEx to the government. So, what is different, and can you explain what this cap registration process is, Miki?
Sure. So, how it works now is USCIS announces in February the registration period for the CAP registration. And this year, USCIS has announced that this window is from March 7th through the 24th. And mobility and HR professionals are required to have their own MyUSCIS account in order to participate in the registration process. And if they already have such an account for their organization, they don't need to create a new one every year. They can use the same one and the same login. So the registrations are then created for each foreign national that'll be sponsored for H-1B status. And the registration information itself is very basic. Basically, the individual's legal name, the date of birth, country of citizenship, passport information, and whether or not they're qualifying for the regular cap, which is basically the bachelor's cap, or based on what's usually referred to as the master's cap. The master's cap is reserved for individuals who got an advanced degree from a U.S. university or college. And most organizations work with Immigration Council to prepare all of the registrations, especially if they have a lot of registrations to put in or if they are not familiar with the CAP registration process.
Right. So, yeah, this time of year, immigration attorneys, including our firm, are really busy preparing the registrations, and we're really cognizant of the registration period. It's like ingrained in our head, like we have to get everything in by the deadline. So we understand that it's really essential to do that because if a registration isn't submitted, then the person is not going to be placed in that lottery. So it's really important to get the registrations in a timely manner. So then once the H-1B cap registration is submitted online, what happens after that? Like it just kind of poof, we submit the submit button and then what do we do?
Yep. So USCIS conducts the random computer generated lottery that you mentioned, and then registrations are selected in this lottery. And essentially, beginning last year, the registration process became more beneficiary centric, which meant that even if multiple organizations submitted an H-1B cap registration for one particular individual, that individual essentially only has one registration, and if selected, well, if any one of those organizations can file an H-1B cap petition for that individual. And then the results of the lottery are announced to the companies that hold the My Registration account under which the person was registered, as well as the attorney that submitted the registration on behalf of the company. Usually, the announcement happens at the end of March, no later than March 31st, and that announcement comes in the form of an email that says, we have taken an action on your case, and then the company and the attorney go into the My USCIS account to download the selection notice, which is then used to file the petition.
Yeah. And so this selection notice, is that it? Is that all that, it needs to be filed with the USCIS or is there anything else that has to be done? It would be nice if we could just do that, right?
Wouldn't that be nice if you just got selected in the H and then your person was an H? So being selected in the lottery is basically just the beginning, right? It's basically your ticket to being allowed to file the H-1B petition or for the company to be able to file the petition for a beneficiary worker. And the window to file is between April 1st and June 30th. And then USCIS will then adjudicate the H-1B petition, which means that then at that point, USCIS is reviewing the eligibility for specialty occupation and the beneficiary's credentials, and they'll either approve, deny, or issue a request for evidence. It's important to note that if an individual has F1 OPT or STEM OPT that expires before October 1st, then the H-1B petition has to be filed before that OPT or STEM OPT expires so that that individual can obtain what's called CAP gap and be able to continue to work from the expiration of the OPT until the H-1B petition has been approved or denied.
All right. So, Mickey, we've talked about, STEM and STEM OPT workers primarily, in this context with the H-1B cap registration process. But, is the H-1B cap available and to other individuals that have some other type of non-immigrant work authorization, such as a TN or so?
Yeah, that's a great and important point to address. So, mobility and HR professionals typically look at their entire workforce of individuals that have some sort of non immigrant work authorization and determine if those folks in other statuses should be sponsored for an H-1B. For instance, if an individual has TN status and the company wants to sponsor them for permanent residence status, the next step is typically to file the H-1B through the lottery and then to file the petition. Also, L1 visa holders who need more time beyond their allotted L1 time to remain in the U.S. while going through the permanent resident process, those are good people to consider for the lottery too. And then we also typically have companies that are entering H4 EAD workers and L2 workers as well that they enter to the lottery. And then I guess just to make sure there's no misunderstanding about the H-1 cap, this is not applicable for people who already have H-1B status with a cap subject organizations, which means that anybody whose H-1B extensions or amendments are being filed don't need to go through the lottery process. And then in most cases, the H-1B change of employer also doesn't have to go through this cap process. Unless, I guess, the only exception is if the individual currently has H-1B status with a cap exempt organization like a university or government research institution or a nonprofit that's affiliated with a cap exempt organization. For those folks, in order to work for a private cap subject employer, they'd have to be selected in the lottery.
Right. So those are all really good things to consider and, look at the entire workforce to see who might benefit from an H-1B classification going forward. And so at this point in time, right, we don't know who's going to be selected in the lottery until the end of March. But there are a lot of instances where it might be best to prepare and be in a situation where you have a strategy going forward. So what should global mobility and HR professionals do now to prepare for those individuals who maybe, if they're not selected in the lottery, they're not gonna be able to stay in the US.
Yeah. It's not too late to still be vetting individuals for entry into the H-1B lottery. Things to look out for are there status issues? Are there potential prevailing wage issues? Those are good to determine before submitting the CAP registration so that once the registration is selected, those issues have already been addressed prior to having to file the H-1 petition. It's also a good time for global mobility and HR professionals to talk with counsel about options for their workers that won't be able to remain in the US to work if they're not selected in this round. These last chancers that we call, discussion and planning for those, it's helpful to do in advance of the registration as well so that there's a plan in place in the event that the registration isn't selected.
Right. And so, we wish everybody lots of luck in the H-1B cap lottery. And for those last chancers, especially that they're selected this year in this round. So these are all great points, Mickey. And thanks for, bringing those to light so that people can think about it. As you mentioned, there's still time. March 7th is still a little bit away. So that's a wrap for today's session. Stay tuned for future episodes on updates to the immigration landscape. And if you don't already, please follow WR Immigration on LinkedIn, as well as Mickey and my individual profiles. And we also transcribe our Rapid Fire Wednesday and post it to a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to. So until then, have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Kim. Good to see you.
You too, Mickey.